Hi everyone, welcome to Eco Learning Classes. This is Professor Geeta Mahesh. To understand frequency distribution, following items or concepts are very essential. Let us start with the frequency. What do you mean by frequency? It refers to number of times a particular observation is repeated. That means it is the number of observation corresponding to particular class. For example, in this table you can see the frequency of class interval from 20 to 30. There are 3 students who got marks in between 20 to 30. Then what do you mean by class limits? There are 2 ends of class. This we call it as class, and there are 2 ends of the class. One is lower limit, another one is upper limit. Which one we call it as lower limit? You can see in this class 0 is the lower limit, 0 is the lower limit which has lowest value, and the highest value we call it as upper limit. Any value, for example this we call it as 10 we call it as upper limit in the class 0 to 10. If you consider 10 to 20, the 10 is lower limit, 20 is upper limit. Now what do you mean by class interval? These class limits form a range are called class interval. So what is class interval? 0 to 10 we call it as class limits, upper limit and a lower limit. The interval or the range or the difference between, range means the difference between the highest value and the lowest value, we call it as the range. In the class, which is the highest value, upper limit, and which is the lowest value, lower limit. If we take as the difference, that we call it as class interval. So here 0 to 10, what is the size or the difference? You call that as a class interval, and the difference is 10. Here also 10 to 20 it is 10, and 20 to 30 is also 10. So that we call it as class interval. What do you mean by class size? The difference between upper limit and lower limit of a class interval. Say 10 to 20, we call it as the size of the class. Here you can see the size of class is 10. That is nothing but a class interval. Then what do you mean by midpoint? It is the average of upper limit and lower limit of a class. If you want to calculate a midpoint, write down the value of any class you choose. Okay, in that write down the upper limit plus lower limit. What is the lower limit? 20 divided by 2. Take an average of upper limit and lower limit. So when you are going to add these two, you are going to get a 50. 50 divided by 2 is nothing but 25. This is how we will find out midpoint. Dear students, now let us understand how to prepare frequency distribution. How you are going to prepare a table of frequency distribution. While we are preparing frequency distribution, following 4 questions need to be answered. Whenever you are going to prepare a frequency distribution, you have to follow following procedure. First one, you have to decide how many classes should we have. That means when you are preparing a frequency distribution table, in that table, how many classes should be there? You have to decide. What should be the size of each class? How should we determine the class limits? Whenever you are going to decide the size of each class, at the same time you have to determine the class limits, upper limit and lower limit. How should we get a frequency for each class? Let us discuss one after the other. First one, how many classes should we have? Whenever you are going to prepare any frequency distribution, the first step we have to find out the range. How will you find out the range? In the given observation, find out the highest value minus lowest value. And if you take a difference of these two, you are going to get a range. After finding the range, if we have large range, then it indicates that the values in the observation varied widely or spread widely. On the other hand, if a range is very small, then it indicates that value of the variable or observation are spread narrowly. After obtaining the values of range, it becomes very easy to determine number of classes once if we decide the class interval. After deciding the class interval, then we can decide the number of classes. The second one which we need to decide is what should be the size of each class. When the range of the variable is given or the range of observation is obtained, we can determine the number of classes once we decide the size of class interval. In the same manner or similarly, we can determine the size of class interval once we decide the number of classes. So here, number of classes and the size of class interval are interdependent. Either we have to determine the size of class interval or we have to decide number of classes. That means we cannot decide one without deciding the other one. Dear students, one thing you have to keep in your mind, the number of classes should be between 5 to 15. If the range is large, then increase the size of class interval and keep the number of classes between 5 to 15. If the range is small, reduce the size of the class interval and increase the number of classes. Now let us discuss how should we determine the class limits. As already I told, in the class limits there are two types of limits. One is upper limit, another one is lower limit. By considering the upper limit where we should include, we have two methods. One is inclusive method, another one is exclusive method. There are two methods of class interval. They are inclusive method, another one is exclusive method. The inclusive method does not exclude upper class limit in a class interval. See here, if we consider 9 is the upper class interval, 9 is the upper class or upper limit, and it is not excluded. You can see here, not excluded. Then this we call it as inclusive method. That means both lower limit and upper limit value of class is included in that class itself is called inclusive method. Then what do you mean by exclusive method? See here, the exclusive method excludes upper limit in a class interval. Here you can see 0 to 10. 0 to 10, 0 is a lower limit and 10 is a upper limit. The value of this 10 is not included in this class. That means the value of 10 is excluded. So because of that reason we call this as exclusive method. You can see here also 10 to 20. In 10 to 20 class interval, 20 is not included, so it is excluded. the value of upper limit 20 is excluded in the class 10 to 20. That we call it as exclusive method, and the value of this 20 when it is in the lower limit, here 20 is included, but when it acts as the upper limit, there it is not included. How should we get the frequency for each class? So how we are going to obtain the frequency? What do you mean by frequency? Number of times a particular value is repeated. That we call it as frequency. When the observations are marked by tally bars against the corresponding classes to find out the number of times it occurs is called frequency distribution. What do you mean by frequency distribution? When the observations are marked by tally bars against corresponding classes. So against this is a corresponding class. Against this, if you mark tally marks, how many times the observation between 0 to 10 is expressed in terms of tally bars. So these we call it as tally bars. So we will mark like this. This we call it as tally bars. So whenever the data is given or observations are given, and 0 to 10 all the observation, the values which lies between 0 to 10 will be expressed in terms of tally bars, and count the tally bars and right here it is 3 times appeared the values between 0 to 10, and 10 to 20 4 times. You can see 10 to 20, between 10 to 20 4 values appeared in the observation. So frequency is 4. In similar way, from 20 to 30 values, there are 2 values between 20 to 30. So frequency is 2. From 30 to 40, if you consider values from 30 to 40, 4 values appeared in the observation. 4 values, so the frequency is 4. Then what do you mean by loss of information in classified data? While summarizing the raw data into classified data, they work to be loss of information. What do you mean by that? Once the data are grouped into classes, the individual observation loses its significance. For example, if 20 to 30 contains 6 observations, 25, 25, 20, 20, 25 and 28. So, when these data are grouped as a class 20 to 30 in the frequency distribution, because 20 to 30, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 values are observed. So only we will write from 20 to 30, 6 values appeared or repeated. So in that case, in the frequency distribution, what we will do, we will make find out a mid value. What we will do, we will find out a mid value. What is the mid value? For further analysis, we will find out a mid value. What is mid value? 25. So we will multiply this 25 with this 6 to find out even averages also. So in that situation, we give importance for 25 as it is a mid value, and the value of 20 and even 28 will lose its importance. All or on an average, we give the value 25 as 25 is the mid value of class interval 20 to 30. This we call it as loss of information. So we don't know individual value. And after making frequency distribution, consider this 3. 0 to 10, 3. That means between 0 to 10, 3 values appeared. We don't know whether it is 1 appeared 3 times, 2 is appeared 3 times, or 1 once, 2 twice appeared, 3, 4, 5, 6. Which value was appeared? We are not able to find out once if we make a frequency distribution. So that we call it as loss of information in classified data. In frequency distribution, there are two types of variables known as univariate classification and bivariate classification. What do you mean by univariate classification? The frequency distribution of one variable is known as univariate classification. For example, the list of students and the marks in economics only if we study, then it is called as univariate classification. What is bivariate classification? The frequency distribution of two variables is known as bivariate classification. Take example, list of students along with economics marks. If we discuss the statistics marks 2, then it is called as bivariate variable or bivariate classification. What is the difference between univariate and bivariate frequency distribution? If we consider meaning, when the data is classified based on single variable, the distribution is known as univariate frequency distribution. If it is classified on the basis of two variables, then the frequency distribution is known as bivariate frequency distribution. The alternative name for this is one-way frequency, and this is two-way frequency. Dear students, if you like, please like, share and subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much.